Welcome back, players! After researching the Amityville murders and the consequential Amityville horror involving Ed and Lorraine Warren, we wanted to take on some of the other Warren cases that have been published and analyze them. Were the hauntings real, or was it all a hoax? Now, before we begin, we want to emphasize that we absolutely adore the Warrens. We are huge fans of their work, their legacy, and all they have done for the field of paranormal investigation. We are strong believers in the paranormal, but we are also strong believers in the truth. With that being said, we want to start with one of the most popular cases the Warrens have ever published that has become a sensational Hollywood hit, now spanning across an entire universe of films: The Conjuring. In this premiere season of the Most Dangerous podcast, we will be breaking down some of our favorite Warren cases, and in this first episode, we will begin by discussing the case of the Perron family.
Before we begin discussing the aspects of the Perron family's haunting, we wanted to give our players a brief introduction to the Warren family and all the amazing things they've done for the field of paranormal investigation. Edward Warren Miney was born on September 7, 1926 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He was an author, lecturer, police officer, and even a World War II veteran. He has stated in interviews that he grew up in a haunted house, and it was this that inspired him to become a self-taught and self-professed demonologist. Lorraine Rita Warren was born on January 31st, 1927 in Bridgeport, Connecticut as well. She was a professed clairvoyant and a light trance medium. Since she was 7 or 8 years old, Lorraine has claimed she could sense individual auras. She was apprehensive to share this information with her family as she was scared they would think she was crazy, so she kept the secret for another 8 years. When she met Ed, he knew right away that something was different about her. Together, the Warrens created the New England Society for Psychic Research in 1952, and it is known as the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. The society houses a variety of individuals, including medical doctors, researchers, police officers, nurses, college students, and even members of the clergy. The Warrens are most notably known for their occult museum, which houses many different satanic objects and demonic artifacts from their many investigations. They have also authored numerous books about their cases and have claimed to have investigated over 10,000 cases of paranormal activity. As stated in our previous episode, the Warrens investigated the Amityville home and were the very first paranormal investigators to do so. Many skeptics, including Perry DeAngelis, Stephen Novella, Joe Nickel, and Benjamin Radford, have looked into the Warrens' most notable cases and have dubbed them as bogus or having not happened and it being completely made up. The Warrens, however, continued to maintain their beliefs in these hauntings and demonic experiences. Ed Warren sadly passed away on August 23, 2006, in Monroe, Connecticut at the age of 79, and Lorraine Warren passed away on April 18th of 2019 at the age of 92. They are survived by their daughter, Judy Warren.
To understand the full intensity of the situation the Perron family was subjected to, we must first understand who the Perron family was. The Perron family includes Roger, Carolyn, and their 5 daughters: Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. Roger was the sole breadwinner for the family, working for a trucking company, and Carolyn was a homemaker. The family experienced many different financial problems, which forced them to move into the countryside where homes were much less expensive than in the city. The Perron family moved into a large farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island in January of 1971, and the family noticed strange things almost immediately after moving into the home. Things started out small. The girls noticed a few harmless spirits, a few angry ones, but then other things would begin to happen. A broom disappearing or moving, hearing scraping on the kettle when no one else was home, and finding piles of dirt in the middle of a freshly cleaned floor. The family is also said to have experienced other spirits and would smell rotting flesh, the beds would rise off the floor, and in the basement Roger claims to have felt a cold, stinking presence behind him. Carolyn told the Providence Journal that shortly after moving into the farmhouse, she was awakened by a tall woman in a gray dress that resembled cobwebs. Her head was also hanging to the side, as if her neck was broken. The woman in the gray dress delivered an ominous message to Carolyn. telling her to get out of the house and never return, and then became physical, starting with pinching, slaps, and finally feeling threats of fire and being stabbed by a knitting needle.
I know what she did!
I got you.
I know what she did! I know what she did!
What?
She possessed the mother to kill the child! She visits Carolyn every night. That's what the bruise marks are! She's feeding off of her!
The common denominator in all of this, though? Carolyn. Carolyn Perron is the one who seemed to be affected the most by this house and whatever entity had found its way inside. So she did what any smart woman would do and researched.
Carolyn's research of the house and the land it stood on was found to be quite gruesome. She discovered that the home and land had been in the same family for 8 generations, and it was consistently plagued with traumatic events. Each generation of family that lived on the land and in the house died under mysterious and horrible circumstances. Many of these deaths belonging to the children of the family. Some of these mysterious and horrible circumstances included drowning in the nearby creek, murder, and even suicide. This information alone would be grounds for anyone, but especially a mother, to be concerned for the well-being of her family. Andrea, the most vocal of the family regarding the haunting done by the malicious spirit in the home, has even been quoted saying, "Whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be the mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position." Who was this malicious mistress entity that Andrea speaks of, you ask? Carolyn pinpoints the entity to be Bathsheba Thayer Sherman. We get goosebumps just thinking about the Bathsheba featured in the Conjuring film. However, the real Bathsheba wasn't quite so malicious.
The unfortunate truth is there isn't a ton of information on Bathsheba. However, our research assistant Jessie pored over the internet for days finding everything she could on Bathsheba, as she is consistently quoted to be the malicious entity that plagued the Perron family in their Rhode Island farmhouse. We know Bathsheba to be alive from around 1814, some records say 1812, until around 1885, putting her at around either 71 or 73 when she died, which is a pretty long life for that time period. She married Judson Sherman and moved to the Sherman farm and property, the same home and land the Perron family lived on, where she had 4 children: Julia, who died when she was only 2, Edward Francis, who was barely a year old when he died, Herbert, who lived to be 53, and finally George, who was 3 when he passed. It is important to note, though, that none of the deaths of Bathsheba's children were noted as suspicious. Judson Sherman died in 1881 of no suspicious circumstances, and Bathsheba remarried a year later, only to die herself of sudden paralysis or stroke 3 years later in 1885. So why is it that Bathsheba has been given such a bad name in the Perron haunting and Warren investigation? It certainly seems like she was a normal woman who experienced a lot of loss in her life, but nothing seemed to be abnormal. Or was it?
Carolyn and Andrea claimed that they were able to find all of this information through researching their town's records. They found that Bathsheba was rumored to be a Satanist, and there was actually evidence to prove that she was involved in the death of a neighbor's child, though no action or trial actually took place to prove her guilty. Before the Warrens conducted their primary investigation of the house, Carolyn showed Ed and Lorraine the majority of the research they found. Previous research conducted on the farmhouse and Perron family after the publishing of Andrea's books confirms that all of this research is non-existent. It is later noted by Andrea that the research they found places the blame on Lorraine for claiming Bathsheba as the malicious entity in the home. Instead of the Hollywood-style haunting conducted by Bathsheba that the film presents, there is actually zero evidence to suggest that Bathsheba was a practicing witch, murdered a child, or being investigated for any type of crime whatsoever, making Bathsheba Sherman to seem more like a normal woman who experienced the full extent of traumatic death that came from living in the 1800s in America. All of the rumors come from rumors and local folklore. Along with that, there's no record of any murder or suicide happening in the house whatsoever. The demonic representation of Bathsheba Sherman has been fully fictionalized by Andrea Perron's novels and the Warrens' investigations of the home. Most importantly to note about all this is that Bathsheba has been unjustly cast as an evil witch, when in fact all she did was suffer greatly at the hands of a non-modernized world. Since the publications of Perron's novels and the film The Conjuring, Bathsheba Sherman's grave has been vandalized several times, and it seems Andrea Perron has not once taken any responsibility for her mistakes or even apologized for demonizing an innocent woman.
Now, just because Bathsheba is not the confirmed case of the malicious haunting, it doesn't mean that the Perron family was not truly haunted in their Rhode Island farmhouse. We're now going to dive into the investigation of the farmhouse, which actually happened multiple times over the course of the 10 years the family lived there. The Warrens made many trips to the home over the course of those 10 years, and Lorraine says that the things that went on there were just so incredibly frightening, and that the home was haunted by the ghost of a witch, Bathsheba. Lorraine is credited by Andrea as the first person in the investigation to refer to Bathsheba as a witch. Lorraine claims that the reason the Perron family was so affected by these malicious entities was due to their lack of religious faith, and that there were as many as 9 spirits in the home. There isn't a lot of evidence published on what happened in all of the visits, only the final seance that sent the Perron family over the edge with the Warren investigation. In the film, it is portrayed that Ed Warren performs an exorcism on Carolyn Perron.
Omne phantasma, omnis legio in nomine Domine, nostri Jesu. Put her down! Put her down! Put her down! Carolyn!
And while it is claimed that Carolyn does become possessed, Lorraine and Ed have spoken out and wholeheartedly state that the exorcism in the film is for entertainment purposes, and that Ed would never perform an exorcism on his own without a Catholic priest. Now, while there was no exorcism, a seance did happen, and Andrea claims to have witnessed the entire thing. During the seance, she claims that her mother, Carolyn, became possessed and was speaking a language that was not of this world, and most definitely not in her normal voice. Carolyn's chair also levitated and was thrown across the room. Andrea said she felt like she was going to pass out by witnessing this event, and after all was said and done, Roger made the Warrens leave their home, asking them to never return.
After a decade of enduring these hauntings, in 1980 the Perron families finally sold their farmhouse and fled to Georgia and never looked back. However, in Andrea's novels, she states that many of the spirits had grown attached to the family and followed them to the new house. The family noted a young boy walking about the house and moving toys, a man with a crooked smile that would stand in the corner of the room and watch the girls play. He became known as Manny. And late at night, the girls say that their hair and feet would be grabbed and tugged while they were sleeping. Cindy also began to be tormented by a man telling her there were soldiers buried in their walls. Of all the things they've experienced, there's one spirit they refuse to speak of in detail. Andrea has hinted that this spirit may have molested her and her sisters. It would be hard to believe all of this is a father and or a mother, but after what they had experienced at the farmhouse, Roger and Carolyn believed every word the girls would tell them. After selling the home, the family that purchased the farmhouse began a restoration project, and the team that was working on the home is claimed to have left the house screaming without their cars, tools, clothing, or any other possessions. They never went back to the house, and consequently, the family never did either, and the house sat vacant for years. The current owner, Norma Sutcliffe, has stated that she and her husband Jerry have experienced some paranormal activity, but not at all as intense as the Perron family. They claim that the door in the front hall will bang, they can hear people talking in another room, sounds of footsteps followed by doors opening, and her husband's chair vibrating in the study. They have never seen any of the apparitions or gray ghost woman that the Perron family saw, but they do however see a blue light in a fog from time to time.
In more recent events, the team of Ghost Adventures went and investigated the Rhode Island farmhouse in 2019 after the Conjuring film sparked an entire universe of films. Bagans and his crew interviewed a few people that have some sort of connection or experience connected to the farmhouse in question. They detail a new account of a possible curse, the Arnold family, that has no connection with Bathsheba. In the late 18th century, Mrs. John Arnold, a 93-year-old matriarch of the family, hung herself in the barn on the property. She was just one of the many suicides to take place on the property. 11-year-old Prudence Arnold was raped and murdered by a farmhand in the house, while her relative, Johnny, took his own life by hanging himself in the attic. Over the years, there were also 2 drownings in a creek that ran through the estate, and the deaths of 4 men who mysteriously froze on the land several years before. That being said, we want to reiterate again that there have been no reports of any of these murders or suicides happening on the property. But that doesn't mean they didn't really happen. Bagans and his team, unaware of this, continued the show and were told that the house continued to have tragic events occur. A roofer falling off a ladder and needing immediate medical attention, and Norma's husband suffering a stroke which forced him into a nursing home and passing away a few short months later. It's reported that Bagans and his team played up the camera and evidence, and that it was more of a circus than an investigation. So it's hard to know for sure if what they found and experienced is legitimate.
This is a lot of information to process and really go through. There was a ton of research to sift through, first-hand accounts through Andrea's novel, rumors, folklore, the Warrens' accounts, and outside researchers that have published findings. We've gone over the research so many times and had to really take a seat and think. Was this real? Or is it a hoax? Andrea has come out and said that multiple parts of her books are not factual and have been fictionalized for entertainment purposes. Lorraine has said that the film fictionalized some elements, but for the most part is completely accurate. The research on the farmhouse and the land is very confusing. There's the Arnold family and their curse, and then there's the Sherman family, along with all the supposed deaths on the land not being recorded. It was very hard for us to make a decision, but I think we have one. We both believe that these hauntings happened and that the Perron family suffered some very traumatic and malicious events. However, we do think some of this was dramatized for entertainment purposes, and that the Warren family may have stolen some of the fame, for lack of a better word, that came with the Perron family's experiences.
It does seem like the Perron family was not very happy with what the Warrens did for their family. In fact, they claim that they made the hauntings worse, but we can't also help but be impressed with the kind of attention the Warrens have created for the field of paranormal investigation. It's impossible to know how the spirit world will react to human disruption, banishment, or eviction, so I don't think it's quite fair to fully blame the Warrens for what happened to the Perron family. Yes, it's absolutely horrifying, but again, we can't control what the spirit does and does not do. So players, our first case has been proven to be very true. It's scary to think that these things can happen to one family, right? Well, players, stay warmed up, because next week we're taking on Annabelle herself.